Well, I mean, in 3 months, the newest hottest thing is going to be the newest hottest thing from Games Workshop.
That's right.
And I think that's more what this video is about to me. Is I'm absolutely going to play a ton of Old World at my own pace in my own time, and I'm going to be really curious to see what it looks like in 6 months after this initial wave of kind of like almost like morbid curiosity is over with it. Geez, so when was the last time we did one of these? The last time we did one of these was September.
Definitely before.
I'd finished. No, actually, you know what it is? We didn't do one of these. You just came down. We just hung out for the day.
That's the last time we hung out.
Yeah,
we actually meant to do some work, but
we just did. We had
chatted for 6 hours. 6 hours.
It was, 6 or 8 hours. Yeah. I think, but this room was starting to be done because we sat in these chairs. I think. But it was still like fall. It was probably like September or October.
Yeah.
I think it was September actually. And then it's been 4 months and I haven't seen you. And we've had a whole bunch of things come out. So I'm glad you're here because I really wanted to talk to you about what we're going to talk about today.
Cool.
I want to talk about the old world.
Oh boy.
I'm so excited.
It's so old.
So everybody, this is Chris from Lords of War Games and Hobbies, a local retailer here in Oakville, Ontario. And you and I have worked together for many years, since what, 07?
Yep. About that time, yeah.
Yeah, you worked for me, and then you opened your shop the year that Cash was born, because it was the day Cash was born.
That's right.
In a blizzard.
They're bound together.
Bound forever.
In history.
February 2nd, 2015.
Through the
which means your 9th store birthday is in like a week and a half.
That's right, yeah.
Your store is turning 9.
Yeah.
And that is a massive accomplishment for any independent retailer. So good for you, man. Thank you.
Yeah, I sometimes, you always downplay your own accomplishments, right? You're just kind of like, 9 years, whatever. But yeah.
Well, this year, GMG turned 9. GMG turned 9 on the 1st of January because I registered the email for Guerrilla Miniature Games with Gmail on the 1st of January of 2015. Yeah. So GMG turned 9 this year, and so does Lords of War. We are bound inextricably, and also my son. I guess that's important too.
Minor detail,
of my son also being turning 9. Yeah, man, I want to talk to you about the old world because there's basically this is the thing that is currently blowing up the internet, and I said this in my like old world review video and like the one sit down I did about it, but I'm taking my time with this one. Because I've played all 8 editions of, I started in 4th edition Warhammer, so I shouldn't say I played all the editions of Warhammer. I played all the editions of 40K. I haven't played all the editions of Warhammer. But I've been playing Warhammer for a long time, and it's not a thing I want to rush.
Yeah.
Making a Warhammer army is like a big commitment, and we're going to circle back to that, but I didn't want to just like bang out a bunch of like stuff to play the game. I wanted to find people I wanted to play it with.
Sure.
Right, so like Jay's rebasing and making movement trays for his Vampire Counts army. I'm gonna get some movement trays to do my dwarves. I'm gonna build and paint some new ogres probably because I love my ogre army now that I got rules for them. I wanted to try out both sides of the fence, like the stuff that's officially in like the Ravening Hordes books,
and then like a legacy,
and then a legacy army too. Like I want to do one of each, and I have one of each already, but I felt like I wanted to do new ones. And then I also want to paint a new army, but I wasn't just going to like rip through and instantly paint.
Yeah. So like Jay and I are my work partner, Jay, who's also been on the channel before.
Well, there's 2 Jay. We each have a Jay.
So it's just a little confusing.
For reference, it's going to get a little, I'm going to,
Jay-Z. Jay-Z. I'll say Jay-Z.
Jay-Z. Okay. Jay and Jay-Z.
So
JG and Jay-Z.
We're in a weird spot because we just purged everything. Like not out of anger, but we were right when we started the business was kind of right when Old World was winding down. So we were kind of in a like, we need money stage of our lives.
You and I recorded a demo of the 1st edition AOS box set in the basement of Lords of War.
I remember that. Yeah. That was cool.
You painted the Blood Dudes and I painted the Stormcast.
Yes, I did. Yeah,
that's right.
Yeah, like I had to go back to
that was 9 years
memory
ago,
place or whatever. For that one. Yeah,
I almost deleted that memory to remember my kids' names.
And I was on very early on your channel playing with my Tomb King's army that I used to have, and which is what we'll get back to that. But like one of the reasons I find some of the Tomb King dialogue really particularly hilarious and funny. And I had a High Elf collection. I had an Empire custom Ulrich themed army. I did.
Yeah, beautiful.
And at the time I was like, keep them. or, have a decent living standard for a year when we were not really making much money.
Well, and also you went in on AOS. Like you were like, yeah, you know what? I've loved playing Warhammer. Like you and I were part of like the Warhammer tournament circuit for a while in Ontario. Yeah. And you loved Warhammer, but you also early adopted into AOS. I think like, I'm willing to give this a shot.
We were kind of at the place where we were almost like kind of burnt out on Warhammer a little bit before AOS even was announced. So like it was for us at least a very natural sort of like time to put it down for a little while. Sure. Like we were kind of all taking a break anyways. And so I think it made it easier for us to be kind of change people.
I think you were and I was exactly where Games Workshop thought the whole community was.
Right.
We had made, so like to give it some context, I have a dwarf army and an Ogre Kingdoms army that were like my two favorite Warhammer armies. I've had many other Warhammer armies, but those are more like my keeper armies. I always had this mind that like there's collections you build up over time. I've been building my dwarf army since 4th edition. And so there are ancient dwarf models in there. I've somehow during all those editions accumulated like 12 painted dwarf lords. You know what I mean? Like I can field a unit of dwarf lords. And because they come from all these different editions and I have such a fondness for them, that's like a legacy army that I've kept. But there reaches a point in your journey through doing that, if you've been a Warhammer player for a long time, and because it was their original game, that when they do a new release, it's just a new book. It doesn't do anything for you. Like, I didn't need new Dwarf Warriors. I have 100 painted Dwarf Warriors. I don't need new gyrocopters. I have several versions of metal gyrocopters, and I painted like one plastic one.
That's right.
So when you're kind of moving through time like that, you could feel that edition bloat. And through 8 editions of Warhammer, you really had like this like feeling of like, I guess I'll buy the army book and the one new unit that came out, but that doesn't support a game.
Well, and that's just what we saw in the retailer side when we were still involved with the Games Workshop. Is we'd had the army book would be the big seller, and then the model kits would just kind of mostly sit there.
You kind of build up inventory,
and it made sense. Like even our I had a big group of people that we all played fantasy together. By the end of our time playing fantasy, like there weren't many armies we hadn't explored, right? Like I probably did 10 or 12 unique different armies. And it's are you going to cycle back and do high elves again?
Again, exactly.
Well, and it's the same thing you said.
And because you've made such a commitment to these huge collections too, for like your keeper armies, like not the like Stillmania army where you pay 2,000 points and you sell it and you move on. You're like, I did that edition of that army and I'm done. Yeah. But like these big commitments, you don't move away from them. And so it also becomes harder and harder for new people to on-ramp into that hobby because the game size got bigger. Like people complained that 5th edition was like Hero Hammer, but the model count for the game was way lower because most of them were metal too. Like it's just a lower overall model count for the game. Yeah. And so like right as this edition's coming out, like this is why I wanted to talk to you. I think you have a really interesting retailer perspective on what did it look like before? What does it look like now? And what's been your experience so far through the launch? Because what I want to get a sounding board for what the internet's hyped right now. The algorithm's drowning in old world talk. There's tons of like, they don't make this model anymore. 3D printer goes burr. People hawking movement trays, of which I'm buying because I've got, like my dwarf collection is not getting rebased. Like I'm just going to play them on movement trays. Right. My ogres don't have to because they didn't change the bases. So like there's things where there's lots of discussion on how to like re-import your trash kind of, you know what I mean? Like your old collections or dust off your dusty lead and play this game. There's lots of people playing the game right now with old collections. So it feels like and there's tons of rubbernecking, I think too. Yes. So it feels like there's a lot of hype, but I think part of what is generating that, and this is my personal opinion before we get started with you, is people are rubbernecking on the idea that there was a car crash of how it went away and they want to see what's going to happen next. So I think a lot of the time and attention on this right now and why it's kind of algorithmically so powerful comes down to the way it left. So seeing it come back, there's a ton of instant marketing around that. So what's it been like now that's my perspective from like the digital side of it, seeing content creators making content and watching the marketing and stuff happen. And this is not, just to finish my thought, this isn't an indictment on the quality of the game. I think, and I said this in my reviews of the books, I think the design team for these rule books were the right design team. I know there's some storied names in there. and I can feel the love and passion with which they wrote these rule books. So I want to pull that out for a second.
Of course.
Not talk about the game itself and how the game plays and the rules and stuff, but talk about the release
and the product
and the product
as a whole.
And the reaction to it. So what's it been like in the store? So like to give it a meat space comparison, how does this feel? Because I have a guess, but I'll come back to that at the end.
Yeah, no. So it is one of Games Workshop's spiciest things, right? Like the fact that it ended, like you said, in a car crash. So, basically our store opening during that car crash almost essentially, and being, part of that for 9 years, it's kind of interesting to see all the customers come in over the years and still, like, Jay and I would be like, oh, you're still caught up on that? Like 7 years has passed, 9 years has passed. The hang-ups were very strong with a lot of people, I think, for sure.
It hung on to Age of Sigmar. Like it was like a stink on 100%. Age of Sigmar.
And we always kind of thought it would fall off over the years, and it just never seemed to fully go away. And I think part of that is because a lot of people that were playing Age of Sigmar weren't fantasy players.
Sure.
They were just new customers or people that tried a fantasy game for the first time. So that's where that game was successful. But in terms of a release, Jay-Z and I were very...
you can just say Jay. They know it's different now. They know it's different.
Yeah, when I'm saying Jay, it's my Jay.
We each have our own Jays.
Yeah. When we heard that they were going to be doing it, we had kind of a very strong mixed feelings about what that might look like and how it would go. And we're bringing our own baggage, right, with us.
Your own imported bias.
Because we were big Warhammer Fantasy Battle players. We both worked for Games Workshop. We saw the decline, and we saw it in real time. So for us as a business owner, your immediate thought is like, well, I don't want to necessarily like be super involved with something that's not gonna go well if that's the case, right? So
it's a risk. It's a financial risk.
So we had that sort of like very conservative mindset heading into that. That's our bias, I want to say, right off the bat. So we were kind of waiting for the previews, and we did a bunch of sort of like almanac updates and stuff like that. And I was waiting for the previews to kind of change my mind on that, and how they were packaging the product, and it never really did.
I said that to you.
Yeah,
I texted you about it. I was like, "Hey, do you want to do this?" And you were like, "Nah." And I was like, and then you were like, "Yo, what's going on?" And I was like, "What? That was you excited?" You're like, "I think I'm getting excited about this."
I had to
like,
maybe fake a little bit of excitement. It had just like this mixed feeling about everything, right?
Sure.
Because there is a genuine like yourself, like I have a genuine love for the old world and the armies, the art, the miniatures. Like of course,
nostalgia.
Of course, I love it. Yeah.
Nostalgia of being in our 20s and like being part of like a community that played this game religiously and talked about it.
And I made most of my good friends playing that game and that sort of thing. So definitely. But, as a business owner, I have to wear that hat, and it always makes you question, is this gonna be successful? So getting closer to the release date, we what we usually do on big releases is we kind of think more about, we should start, really putting the feeler questions out there to our customers, like, what is this something you're going to be like interested in actually buying? Because like you've been talking about this for a while, and there wasn't really much, at least in our community. We had to kind of work a little bit to get people kind of interested, I guess. So what we found is there's a lot of people sort of sitting on the fence,
Rubbernecking.
And that may be like, the local bias, like maybe a result of our own fence sitting, I should say. We weren't the most excited, but I think we were pretty on the point about this. And a lot of customers were kind of in the same position as us because they had kind of moved on and stuff like that, but they still loved Warhammer Fantasy. And I think a lot of people moved into I think I'm going to buy a rule book or a forces book and kind of dip my toes in and see what happens. And I think
it feels like those are the people that knew that it's a long road to make a Warhammer army. So if you don't have a Warhammer army right now, that's a big time and work investment to paint a couple hundred models maybe.
Absolutely.
Right? So like that, I can understand that.
Yeah.
What was the reaction from people who never played it? Did you have any of those conversations? Did you have anyone come to you and ask?
So there were for sure some people that, and then I think this is who the models were actually for. Like if you had to ask me, like they're repackaging a Tomb King box set, they're repackaging a Bretonian army box set. Like who are these models actually for? because they like, you know, a little bit of a news alert to people that don't know. They sat on the shelf in Games Workshops and collected dust for many years. Like they were 2 of the least popular fantasy battles.
They didn't get new books.
No. Yeah.
The Bretonnian Army book from 2003 is the Bretonnian Army book from 2015.
That's right. But Tomb Kings had a cool 8th edition book. They didn't get a redo in a lot of their core units, so I think which caused a lot of the problems of them not being exciting.
But they got new plastic.
But they got some new plastic things, and they were fun to play, and I played them, and they were really cool. So I think those model repackages were really for people that either felt like they missed out that first time when they just got into the hobby right when Old World was winding down, or just like right after. Because you remember, there's like a ton of new people in the hobby now that you know that weren't in it before.
Well, there's a whole other generation
that played Total War. Like that was a massive. There's a whole other generation
of hobbyists in that 8-year gap. Yeah. But their expectation is going to be that it's a game like Age of Sigmar 40K.
That's where it gets kind of dicey, right?
Okay.
So buying the models, that's one thing. Like it's very transactional. It's easy to do. Get excited. So I think Games Workshop sold a lot of kits to people that were either shoring up a collection. I know this specifically. Like a lot of people were buying for that reason. They missed out on new Shop D or you know these metal models or whatever, and just like kind of picking those up because they could. Or people that like missed out because they like the Total War games.
Did they buy them from you, or did they buy them from Games Workshop?
So this is interesting. A lot more people were going to Warhammer stores on this particular release. And I think I still have a lot of colleagues at Games Workshop, and we were kind of chatting about, because they had disproportionately more successful launch days than I say like the FLGSs did.
Yeah.
And I think it's got a little bit to do with like, this must tell us that a lot of people that weren't like actively buying Games Workshop products must have just looked up, where's my closest Warhammer store for this release, and just gone to it. And anecdotally, I have some evidence for that.
Yeah.
But it must be the case, because otherwise they would have just gone to their like, you know, local shop they always go to, right?
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, that's kind of an interesting thing. So I think the Warhammer stores did pretty well from what I can understand on release day. They also have a queue bypassing system, which is pretty cool. So if you go to a Games Workshop store, you can just bypass all the queues when you order in the store.
And just pre-order immediately.
So if you want like cool things like dice and all that stuff, you're not waiting in line.
Well, North America didn't get any of that stuff, so it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
That's a whole other thing.
Something snowstorm? I don't know. Yeah.
No, they just didn't.
They just didn't get
any of the made order stuff.
So to sum up how I think release day went, the books and all the book products, all the ancillary like magic card packs, there was a lot of enthusiasm to purchase those things. And the models were like a very distant second.
Yeah.
And I think that's very telling.
Yeah.
And I also think that's kind of, you could kind of expect that too, right?
Well, to mirror that, I will say that one of the things I saw that I've noticed as a pattern and a trend is that most of the people currently playing the game after launch are playing it with old armies.
There you go. Yeah.
Right. They've done to kind of back up what you're saying. They've done I'm gonna dust off my collection and try these new rulebooks and see how the game goes.
Yep.
So that's really interesting, because that'll kind of lead to like the last point. But let's finish your thought. Like, if you were to compare this release to, let's say, the Horus Heresy release, which is what same studio, same kind of expectation and buildup of hype. How would you compare those two release days?
Right off the bat, much less successful.
Okay.
Yeah.
Why?
I think it comes from at the end of the day, it is nice to sell people books, but you like models really drive the sales for a business, right? Mm-hmm. So when you don't have the opportunity to add on things like that to someone's like purchase, so like when the Horus Heresy came out, people were buying like, you know, the rule book, or like really actually most people wanted the big box. So right off the bat, you have like almost like a $400 sale.
Sure.
Which is super impactful. You're getting a ton. And it was about the miniatures. People wanted the models. They wanted the toys. And then because they were excited about the miniatures, they were also excited about the next wave of releases of miniatures. So what we found is we actually had a really successful summer, because there was a ton of stuff that the Games Workshop had planned to put out after.
Yeah, Leviathans came out.
That people were fully primed to buy, right? So people were primed to buy. So conversely, and maybe we can get into this a little bit, but like, I don't know what the plan is, or like, how does that person who comes in and buys a rule book from you, and maybe a Forces book, how does that translate into them coming back for miniatures, or does it, right? And so I think there's a lot less opportunity from someone who's buying back into Old World than someone who's getting to Horus Heresy. Because like you said, it feels a lot like when people were getting into Age of Darkness, it felt like they were buying into a brand new game, right?
Because there were legacy customers. But also that box was an on-ramp to 2 players playing a game if they needed to.
And this, like you said, feels like a lot of people revisiting an old friend and making some kind of like purchases so they can kind of dip their toes back in, maybe with old miniatures, or maybe with a plan. I find it's almost like a 50-50 split with old miniatures, or with a plan to someday maybe build an army. That was a huge thing too. I myself fit into that category.
Yeah, me too.
I grabbed a rule book.
Yep.
I grabbed both Forces books because I just want to, read and enjoy that. I get excitement and just like, I don't know, like a warm fuzzy feeling in my stomach when I'm looking at army lists and
100% just noodling.
Upgrade a lord. Oh
just
yeah,
noodling.
And you're like biting blade. Oh yeah.
Oh yeah, give me that brace of pistols, baby. Give me that brace of pistols.
and it's hard to explain to someone who never played in because Games Workshop's so you take this data slate guy now for this amount of points, and you can pick an option, but you're not paying points. It's just kind of all.
I would call it the fantasy football gene. Is that one of the things that and it's funny because I always compare this to the company that I think does it best right now with their free app, which is Corvus Belli. But our inherent drive to arrange things into new and pleasing shapes is less served by modern Warhammer games than it has been in the past. And I think part of the fascination with these games is that tinkering, is the time spent in between playing the game actively or building and painting models, where what you're doing is you're noodling on a list and you're tinkering with lists. And that to me is the actual like obsessive part that keeps you a customer and keeps you in that ecosystem for a company. Games Workshop is just one company of many that offer that kind of stuff. But you can really, I had that same reaction where when I got those books for the first time, the first thing I sat and did was got my yellow legal pad and made 700 army lists. And I loved the return to that.
That's a part that was like a legitimate part of the hobby.
It is. It's the meta hobby of the planning and collecting stage. It's organizing your baseball cards, right?
100%.
And there's a million hobbies that have that aspect, and I think it's been devalued in recent years because it's not, there's no like direct,
it's reductive, right? Like it's been reduced so much. I think
you can't well it's by kind of widening the on-ramp and making it easier by making it digital or making it flat, it's less challenging. It makes it more available to people, but it also makes it less compelling to people.
Well, you can organize your 40 baseball cards. It's less exciting than organizing your like 1,000 baseball cards.
Or you have an app on your phone that organizes them for you. That to me is I think where it's going, right?
Yeah.
So that's really interesting. So then my last question then about the anecdotal stuff for you is, how many games have been played in your store?
A big old zero. Yeah. I think that does speak to, I'm not like, I'm sure there's hobby shops that have had people.
I've seen them.
Even come in on day one and play.
Yep.
But I think it's important to point out like the amount of steps that you need to go through, even to take an old army and get it ready to play Old World, right? It speaks to one of the reasons why the game had trouble sticking around the first time.
Yeah, it was a blood price. It's got the highest blood price in Wargammer.
That's right. Yeah, gold, a blood price and a gold price, like both combined together. Yeah.
Of time, money, and effort. Those are the three things that are the commodity that every company is chasing in every hobby industry. Is that we as consumers only have those three things in a finite amount, and Warhammer asks for them to be very high. So then this is, I guess, leading into part 3 of this is, what do you think the go forward is for this? Because right now there's a ton of time and attention going to it, and my thesis at the beginning of this was how much of that is to do with the legend that's built up around how Warhammer went away and its legacy. How much of it has to do with the fact that there are a ton of previous customers who are returning to the fold, if you will, with their collections ready to go, or as close basically at the gate to play, that happens. And if there isn't a clear, broad on-ramp to this, what do you as the retailer guy, how are you planning around the fact that you can't really get armies? You can't really, you know what I mean? Like, you have to wait for the next wave of products to come out from Games Workshop. you're not super accessible to you, and there's no clear new customer recruitment tool for this. There's no Island of Blood sitting on your demo table for you to show people how to play Warhammer with.
And I think a perfect capture of this to help the audience kind of think about this in terms of like
where you're sitting,
where I'm sitting, or even just like as a customer coming into a shop, is what do you think the old world section is going to look like in a hobby shop? And I can tell you right now, it's going to be very small, right?
It's gonna be leftovers.
It's going to be leftovers. I like most Warhammer stores will probably have like sort of like a splash system where they will splash in a lot of stuff and then like massively reduce the amount they carry to a point where like you might not even see like almost anything on the shelf that isn't like a pretty new release for the game. And for an independent retailer like myself, the range will be as simple as like they'll have the army boxes for now. Maybe new ones will replace those ones. The books. And a very, very small select amount of plastic box sets that we can order. And that's it. Everything else is direct. Everything else is web store only. So that means we can still order stuff for people, but there's that. As soon as something becomes web store only, there's this like sort of convenience factor that's just gone. And that massively impacts the amount of model like purchases that you'll see from those things.
It feels to me like a Kickstarter game. That's what it feels like to me. Like the same reason that Kickstarter games deliver a whole bunch of product up front and you never see them. They have such a hard time penetrating into the real world market, and they have such a struggle to become an established thing, is that you deliver a whole bunch of stuff up front to the people that want it directly, but then later on there's no gate into that ecosystem that's easy and accessible, and there's not a lot of recruitment happening to it. So it kind of stays and exactly as it was when it launched, but doesn't grow.
And just like a Kickstarter, the incentive for the people that are like the retailers is very low, because like you said, you know, let's take a look at the release weekend. I mostly sold things to people that wanted it. Going forward, would be much less people that want it. There's much less chance for me to sell things to people that want it. So is it something I'm going to put a lot of attention and focus into?
Well, if you have 5 gaming tables on your gaming night, and 12 people are there, and 10 of them want to play 40K, and 2 of them want to play Old World, who are you going to let play? Who gets cut?
Yeah.
And that's not to say that those people don't deserve a spot in your gaming store, and I know exactly that you will let them play. Yeah. But are they even going to be customers for you going forward in a real sense, because they can't buy anything from you?
Right.
So that's a really challenging question, and I'm really interested. Like I'm not trying to doomsay here, because I think it's going to stick around. I think it's going to make Games Workshop exactly the amount of money they want it to make them.
Yep.
It's going to justify them keeping those molds, right? Because they've had to pay to store those molds for 8 years, making no money. You got a thing sitting in your production facility, in your factory, that makes $0. This is going to pay for the next 8 years of them keeping those molds on a shelf somewhere, insured, and all the costs associated with having those things in product.
And we've used Lord of the Rings is a good analogy for like how they sell Lord of the Rings products to. I think that's probably, and I think what you're talking about is reducing, like lowering people's expectations for what they really should be expecting from the old world going forward. I think, right?
Yeah, because I mean, in 3 months, the newest hottest thing is going to be the newest hottest thing from Games Workshop.
That's right.
And I think that's more what this video is about to me. Is I'm absolutely going to play a ton of Old World at my own pace in my own time, and I'm going to be really curious to see what it looks like in 6 months after this initial wave of kind of like almost like morbid curiosity is over with it. It'll be interesting to see what happens. And I really want to check back in with you in 6 months and see.
That would be an interesting time to talk about. And if anyone will even watch that video.
Well, because we're going to do
because all the hype will be gone.
But we're going to do another video. We're going to do another video that you guys will be able to watch later on next week, where we check back in on a conversation you and I had last summer about 40K 10th edition. Because I really want to have that conversation too. Because it's going to be interesting to see what happens. It's going to be 6 months later.
Right.
After 40K 10th. So I hope you guys enjoyed that. I'm really interested to see what the ecosystem looks like. And I'm really excited that you came down today so we could have this conversation, because I'm very curious. I don't know. I'm not trying to be cynical, because I think the game and the product is great, but I'm it sits in this unique place where I think there's a lot of sizzle, and I think that there's going to be a lot of like returning customers who had cool collections. But it's still it's on a very high shelf right now.
Right.
It's hard. It's going to be hard to get past just buying the rule books and actually collect and build an army in a meaningful way.
And new customers come with new expectations too, right? Yep. So there will be an interesting sort of situation.
But even just playing it doesn't play like any Warhammer game today.
Right.
It's not standing in circles the longest. Because that's every Warhammer game right now boils down to standing in circles the longest. And old Warhammer does not play like that. And that's going to be incredibly compelling for, I hope, people that take the chance on it and build armies and go with that commitment level, and maybe incredibly off-putting for the rest of them.
Right.
Because it's not going to feel like what, for the last 8 years, Warhammer's felt like to them. It's going to be really neat. I can't wait for you and I to play our first Old World game.
Yeah, pencil it in for 2027 or whatever.
It's going to be like 500 points. We'll just play like a 500-point game. Let's end off. So what is your plan for this? Because you were planning on doing a like bring out your lead old gits like return to Warhammer thing when the last time you and I talked, and you've kind of put it on pause.
Yeah.
So what kind of pluggies can we do for whatever's going on with the old world with Lords of War?
We were working on a little community event that we could like kind of do like even across the world that we could do online or whatever. And I think the reason I kind of put a pin in it is myself. I was like, what am I going to even do for this?
What can I get?
So it was really a sourcing models question. And so I kind of got stunned on that question. And I haven't really like moved past that at this point. So
I guess you could promote the Patreons, the 10 million 3D printer Patreons that are going up right now.
Could do that. Yeah. I think people could already find.
Want to make some fast money? Yeah. Want to make some fast money? Because there's about 75,000 3D printer Patreons for every single faction in Warhammer.
Yeah.
And they're going to make a ton of money. Those people are going to make a gajillion dollars right now just square basing the AOS proxies they have.
I have to say, I'm a little surprised, and I think Games Workshop, maybe they just couldn't get this in order in time, but I'm a little surprised there wasn't a larger made-to-order push.
I don't think they have the capacity.
Yeah, it must be that. Like, it must be that.
There's still, this is an experiment with old molds.
Yeah.
Like, those molds they were there on a shelf. You know what I mean? There's a few new ones in the production queue, but you're going to cast up a significant amount of products, even for what they did. They released a ton of product into the world.
It was a lot of stuff, yeah.
It's a lot of stock.
Yeah.
Less than Leviathan, but still a lot of stock.
Yeah.
You can still buy Leviathans.
Oh, yeah. Readily available.
Readily available on your shelf, yeah. So, yeah, it's going to be interesting. I mean, I'm interested to see what you do, and I'll check back in, and I'll let you guys know what Chris decides, because whatever it is, I'm taking part in it, because the goal was that we did this together. Sure. We talked about this in the beginning. Yeah. Maybe I'll just start something without you, and then
you can just drag me along.
Just drag me along.
Force me into
just force you. Want to paint some more Tomb Kings? They're real easy to paint with an airbrush.
I feel like I'm like in Looper or something. Yeah. I always say I got to go back in time and shoot myself or whatever, so I don't do this.
I'm Nick Cage in Nick of Time. We're Nick of timing it today. Well, thanks so much for coming in, man. Talking about Old Worlds. And you guys check back in later for us talking about 40K.
Thanks.
Bye, everybody. Thanks for tuning in to check out our chat today, everyone. And if you want to check out more from Chris at Lords of War, you can subscribe to their new YouTube channel above. We'd love to hear your experiences in your local game store with the Warhammer The Old World launch, so tell us about it in the comments below.